Welcome to False Dichotomies. I'm Cy Castells,
I'm Daria Quinn.
and today we're going to talk about The History of the Entire World, I Guess, by Bill Wurtz, which is a animated video. It's available on YouTube or on his Bill Wurtz's website, billwurtz.com. So, Daria, what did you think of this video?
Not the easiest to follow.
Yes.
If you can remember, if you're old enough to remember the Micro Machines guy that talked really, really fast in the Micro Machines commercials, he's like one of the world's fastest talkers. It kind of goes like that. So I mean, you have to watch it like a bunch of times just to retain any of the information because it goes by so quickly.
And yet, interestingly, Bill Wurtz's delivery is kind of relaxed. Yeah, it's surprisingly chill for how fast paced it is, which I find really almost meditative. It just sort of zooms past you, but it doesn't like raise your heart rate or anything. At least in my experience, it just sort of rolls over you.
Yeah. I mean, the pace is, I guess that's like part of the gag.
Yeah.
Is like, okay, we're going to cram like the history of everything into a really short span of time. So there really is no time to breathe.
Yeah, just under 20 minutes, which is long for a YouTube viral video, which like I think someone said like it has to be like 3 minutes long to hold someone's attention. And this one is just under 20 minutes long.
And it doesn't feel like that at all.
Oh yeah, it's like it feels more like a 5-minute video. There's this series of paradoxes in terms of the length and the content and the pace. That it's like you can't believe how much is in there, but you also can't believe that it's so long. So, you know what my first thought when I first started to see this video? You could make a religion out of this.
that comes up a few times.
Yes.
Yeah, mine was slow down. I can't keep up.
In fact, I was thinking that could be the title of this episode. You could make a religion out of this. Another thing I noticed with this video was something that I know as a poetic strategy, and that is repetition with variation. And we're both poets.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we know each other. And most poetic devices rely on this concept of repetition of variation. And for instance, rhyming is repetition of the final sound of the word with variation of the front end of the word. Metaphor is repetition of a concept with different images. Rhythm is repetition of the beat with different syllables. There's a lot of things that get repeated in this. There's for instance, the phrase "you could make a religion out of this" every time a new religion gets started.
And then there's the parts where it gets like songy.
Yes.
Like, here comes China, and the sun is a deadly laser.
The sun is a deadly laser. I saw some.
But now there's a blanket. It's okay.
Not anymore. There's a blanket. Yeah. And that brings me to another thing: the language of marketing. Some people refer to the songified portions as jingles, and a lot of them have like this advertising kind of quality. For instance, the explanation of photosynthesis, where it's like, tired of living at the bottom of the ocean? Now you can eat sunlight using a revolutionary technique. You can convert sunlight into food. Taste the sun. So, side effect: there's oxygen everywhere, and the sky's blue. And there's a couple of other things that are described in these like marketing terms. And yet there's nothing commercial about this piece. It's not trying to sell you anything. Bill Wurtz is like notoriously non-commercial in his work. He makes a lot of music, and it's available for free. In fact, I downloaded this video for free off of his website. You don't have to watch it on YouTube. You can download it. You can own it. I've never seen any sponsorship or advertising like embedded in his work. So the fact that he so adeptly uses the language of marketing without any marketing, I find it refreshing because it's sort of reclaiming those tools and those artistic techniques for a non-commercial end.
And it seems like the point of it is to sort of make it easier to digest. And it's the thing that they tried when we were in school but completely failed at, which was to make education fun.
Oh yeah.
And so there's a way to do that. He found the way, and what we got in school was Barney.
Yeah, I think to an extent, Schoolhouse Rock, I think, succeeded at that.
Yeah.
There were some really catchy tunes in Schoolhouse Rock. I know a lot of people only know how a bill becomes a law because of Schoolhouse Rock, or what a conjunction is. And oddly enough, in my school days, I did not see a lot of Schoolhouse Rock until, for some reason, I ended up taking a school field trip to a staged production of Schoolhouse Rock, which was fascinating to see without having seen any of the cartoons.
Right.
But that was apparently a huge part of a lot of people's childhoods that I kind of missed out on. But we haven't really seen a whole lot of that strategy in more recent times that hasn't fallen flat on its face. And I think it's because they were possibly trying too hard. Whereas, like, Bill Wurtz is not an edutainer. He's he's a musician mostly. Most of what he produces is music, with videos that he produces with some of the same styles as in this video. He did a hugely popular history of Japan.
Yeah, I saw that one too.
Approximately half as long, and in the very same style. And then he. A while later, he spent almost a year just basically stopped making anything else, and people were worried about him, saying, why aren't you making anything? What's going on? And then he came out with this huge video, and everyone was like, oh, that's what you were working on for the past year. Right. And there was much rejoicing. I get the impression from most of Bill Wurtz's work is that he really just does this for fun. And that, I think, is what makes it so good. He's not trying to game any kind of system. He's just making what he wants to make, and it happens to be amazing. And I think that's like something that some of the best art is just made because someone wanted to make it, not because they wanted to be popular, or because they wanted to make money off of it, or because they wanted to address some sort of problem with it, but because they wanted to do it. And that happened to be what a lot of people wanted to see as well.
To kind of just throw in another point, I don't know what your point of reference would be on this, but there is a character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that appears in the Ant-Man movies. His name is Luis. And he tells stories very similarly to how this video presents the history of the universe.
Okay.
He's somewhat of a fast talker. I really couldn't give you an example right now without just telling you to look up Luis if you have no idea what I'm talking about. And Luis is actually a fairly popular popular character within the fandom for that specific reason. When Infinity War and Endgame came out, there were people like legitimately petitioning for there to be a scene of Luis telling Scott Lang, Ant-Man, exactly what happened in the 5 years that he was stuck in the quantum realm, and or to recap the Avengers in Infinity War or whatever else. It's like just have him recap these things. It would be so cool, and so it's like this video is probably like better at it than that character, but it's the same sort of thing where they try to explain a lot of things really quickly.
And I think that's something that's especially seeing a resurgence nowadays, but with the extreme density of information that surrounds us these days, and that is the art of summary. To summarize something, it takes a lot more skill than you might think at first until you actually try to do it, because you have to, number one, figure out what's important enough to include and what you can safely leave out, which, especially with this topic as big as history of the world, that relies significantly on your perspective. Famously, in American schools, world history is often the history of the United States and its interactions with Europe, mostly.
Yeah. There's a lot in this video that wasn't even hinted at or at least when I was in high school. I think you're 30-ish. I'm
31.
31. Okay, I'm 38. So I'm almost 40. So that's about an 8-year gap. So that's enough time for there to have been a change in the educational system.
Yeah, well,
because I think you dealt with more standardized tests by that point.
Yeah, there was a lot of standardized testing, but the same problem still existed. I remember very vividly in middle school we had a world history class, and when I got my textbook at the beginning of the year, I was a huge nerd, and history was one of my favorite subjects to learn about, not necessarily to actually do like.
So you read ahead.
So I was looking ahead in my history textbook, and I was like, oh sweet. There's a whole chapter on African history. I have never studied African history before. This is going to be so cool, so fascinating. And I was like getting hyped up, and then
don't do it.
They didn't do it. I got to the end of the year, and I was about to when I was about to give back my history textbook, I realized, shit, we never covered that chapter on African history. We did something about China. And I think that was the only non-white history we did. And I was so pissed off because I was like, I was looking forward to that. But imagine, because I'm white, imagine how it might have been for a black student in the same classroom, seeing like, oh, there's this glimmer of hope. Maybe they'll study African history, and maybe people who look like me who weren't slaves will be represented, and then they just skip over it entirely. Whereas in this particular video, there was a lot of African history.
Egypt was a society. They mentioned that. The Ghana Empire with all the gold. There was the Swahili coast.
Let's become the Swahili on the Swahili coast. Said the Swahili on the Swahili coast. And there was like the population of Madagascar.
And then there was something about Chad. The Chad is a lake in the middle, and there's like stuff that happens around Chad. And
there's just the fact that Chad means lake.
Like I didn't know that. And it's like I've only ever heard only ever heard Chad referred to as a name of a guy and part of incel culture.
Yeah, and let us not forget in the 2000 election and hanging Chads.
Yes, hanging Chads. So basically, there's nothing positive about Chad whatsoever,
except that it means lake in the middle of Africa.
Unless, of course, your name is Chad, and then you might want to check on yourself.
Yeah, if your name is Chad and you're not a douchebag, contact us and we will apologize. Here's another thing I noticed after many, many times listening to this. And this is something that happened that is easier to notice if you listen to it on loop. The video begins, hi, you're on a rock floating in space. And then it describes the situation that we're in the world. And then, how did this happen? And then we learn the history of the world. And then, once we get to the present day, it just summarizes the current situation again. It says, by the way, where the hell are we? And if you loop back to the beginning, it says, hi, you're on a rock floating in space. So it begins with the answer to the question that it ends with.
Right.
So I call this, in my notes, I called it the dialectic loop, because I'm a pretentious blowhard. But it's really fascinating how it's like this self-contained, almost like it's made to be listened to on repeat. Did you notice that?
Now that you pointed out, I can see it. I didn't notice it at the time. It was just kind of, I just thought it was interesting how it's like we went through all of this, and then I have the same problem when I tell stories, is I can go off on a tangent and completely forget what I was talking about. And that's how I felt was he just went on this tangent, and then he realized, hey, what was I talking about?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of representative of the way human history kind of works. It forgets itself, and then it has to take some time to figure out, oh wait, where did we come from? So every couple of 100 years, we have to kind of rewrite our own history as we like figure out, wait a minute, we were wrong about, like, for instance, Europeans, when they realized, wait, Africa is not this great dark continent without any civilization. Oh, let's try and figure out what all the history is and learn about it.
You know, the history that we didn't outright completely destroy.
About that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And we're not, and we don't just mean that about Africa either. We're pretty much talking about everyone we fucked.
Whereas
which is pretty much everybody.
Like American history, it didn't have to be white history. It could have been Native American history, but no, we fucked that up. Here's a question that I would like us to discuss. The way that historical atrocities and war and destruction and death is handled, it's ridiculously understated. Mm-hmm. He repeatedly refers to wars as a discussion. Mm-hmm. It's handled differently in the Japan video, but in this video, the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki are kind of turned into this like video game montage or sequence where it's like
Japan versus USA, fight, extinction bombs, boom boom.
Yeah, exactly, and it's
America wins.
And then this is an interesting contrast from the Japan video, which is much more like somber, I think, in the way it handled it, because it was like bomb, and then there's silence, and then there's another one, bomb, and then there's silence. And I think there's a case to be made that the way that these atrocities are handled is disrespectful, or that it erases the suffering that resulted. And I wonder how we can try to make sense of that.
I personally read it as sarcastic. It's something that our generation is almost infamous for, is our ability to snark. And I just feel like that, that a war as a discussion is like, well, clearly not a discussion. Yeah. But, it's like we had a 7-year conversation about that. And, that over Ohio.
Yeah.
Yeah, back when Ohio was actually important. Oh, wait. I guess that it is in election years. We live in Ohio.
Although that's changing. Ohio's turning a whole lot redder as time goes on.
Yeah.
By the way, we're from Ohio. Ohio has such low self-esteem. I think that when Ohio just gets name dropped, it's like.
By the way, this transcript is several pages, probably about a dozen pages.
Almost 4,500 words. And it's just the words, not the spoken words, right. Not the words that appear on the screen or the images. Except turkey makes a brand new turkey. Here's another understatement. Guess where all the sugar's made? In Brazil. Stolen in the Caribbean. And it's so goddamn profitable, you might forget to not do slavery.
Yeah, that's...
Oh yes, Britain and France are having a friendly discussion about who should control the entire world. More specifically, Ohio. And all the Ohioans were like, we got mentioned! we were important enough to have a 7-year discussion about it.
And our lake wasn't on fire, and LeBron was still here.
Oh, yes.
And we had things called industry and Youngstown.
Oh yeah, Youngstown. Back when Youngstown was young.
And controlled by the mob.
JK, Youngstown didn't exist yet. LeBron James was there, though. He was definitely there.
And the lake was definitely not on fire.
Not yet. It wasn't the lake that was on fire.
It was the Cuyahoga River? Okay.
13 times.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, we're dumb. The first 12 times weren't enough. We had a river that had been set on fire 12 times. And we were like, no, that's not a problem. 13th time, maybe we should clean it up. But yeah, humans are dumb.
And this is folks, is why we have an EPA.
Yeah.
Or at least we used to have an EPA before whoever's running it now decided that doesn't actually need to work or anything, but digressing from point.
Yeah, I think that so back to like the question. I think you're right that it's very sarcastic. And here's something that we have a hard time with is, as a species, as a culture, really, popular culture these days. And that is, we have a problem with knowing where to draw the line.
Yeah.
And I think that this video, toes the line pretty well in terms of its tone and how it handles these things. Similar to the way that it borrows the language of marketing without marketing anything to us, I think that it borrows the language of understatement. In the way that history is taught and talked about, these atrocities are already understated.
In some ways, comically so.
And in some ways, like, tragically so. For instance, the fact that, like, Holocaust denial is seeing a massive resurgence in America and in Europe. There are people who are saying that Auschwitz wasn't a bad place to be sent to because they had a swimming pool, just completely ignoring the fact that the swimming pool was there for the guards and their families, and also as, in case of fire, they could use the water. Genocides are going on right now that people are just ignoring. And I think what Bill Wurtz has done here is, by understating things even more, he's not giving anybody the opportunity to, like, sensationalize it.
Right.
By reacting to this understatement, you can say, oh, yeah, that wasn't a discussion. That was a war that a lot of people died in. And it was over Ohio. Why would anyone fight a war over Ohio? And that gets you thinking, wait, what are we fighting wars about right now that maybe we shouldn't be fighting?
God, oil. I don't know. What did everybody go to war over in the past? Sugar, spices, silk, gold, religion,
slaves. Just viscerally, it's like, by pushing back on the, like, understatement, you can end up pushing yourself further into respecting the history for what it really is. You'd be like, oh no, it wasn't casual, it was really important. How important was it? Well, let's try and figure that out. And it kind of pushes back against the tide of people trying to downplay things for real, in terms of, like, saying, oh, the Holocaust wasn't that bad. Or so in that way, I think it did a good job. If you disagree, yeah, I think there's definitely a case for that too. You don't have to like it.
You have to remember, there's only about 20 minutes to explain all of this. Yeah. So if you got more than one sentence dedicated to you, you are important.
Yeah, I really liked how it handled the Cold War. A good portion of history has been taken up by the Cold War. In the video, it starts out with the Korean War. And it's like Korea versus Korea. And then
let's meet the sponsors.
Let's meet the sponsors. And it's the two global superpowers. And they're having a friendly discussion again. But they realize that they will have atom bombs. So if they really fight, that would be the destruction of the world. So let's just keep it cool.
And spy on each other.
And it's portrayed as this fun, goofy, terrifying, like, you know how sometimes a movie villain is shown to be especially evil because he's turning it into a game? Jigsaw. Let's play a game. Except Jigsaw was deadly serious. So how about Joker? And how he really did feel like this was all just fun and games. And that's
depending on your translation.
Yes, depending on the translation.
But I'm thinking you're
so many different kinds of
I'm thinking that you're talking Dark Knight Joker.
I'm talking about,
I just want to see the world burn.
I think that's the version of Joker that I've actually, like, had my most recent experiences with.
Okay.
I have not seen anything involving the Joker that was made since then.
Okay.
And my experience of Batman before then was a little bit peripheral. I wasn't really into it the way that some other kids were, but I knew what it was. I recognize there's lots and lots of different versions of the Joker out there, but in my mind, the Joker he's being terrifying and cruel and destructive because it's fun. And there's also, and that's like a recurring trope, I think, in a lot of stories with a villain, where it's like sometimes a villain is terrifying because they have very strong convictions, and then there's the villains who just want to see the world burn, and it's kind of hard to tell sometimes which is worse, because if someone has strong convictions, there's a chance that you could convince them. If you can turn the mirror on them and see and show them the harm that they're doing, they might be able to say, oh my God, what have I done? And feel remorse. But if someone is just playing, it's a very different kind of terror, because all you can ever hope to do is stop them by force. You can't convince a troll, because they're just, if you convince them that they're wrong, they'll just change their opinion. It doesn't matter to you.
And there has definitely been a rise in that type of villain in real life, obviously. As you just mentioned, the average internet troll. We could make arguments for certain public figures in that same vein, but that is a different show.
One more point that I wrote down, and this plays into the Cold War thing, and it also plays into the way it's paced, because like it gets to a point where we're dealing with global powers and world wars. The way that the animation works is there's this animated globe that rotates as you're focusing on different parts of it, and it moves around faster and faster and faster as like the events taking place are involved more and more of the globe. And before long, you're just zooming back and forth to like opposite ends of the globe, as Britain is trying to control China, as Japan is trying to attack America, as Russia and America are kind of using South Asian countries to get at each other.
Yeah, their little discussion.
Yeah, I think it's another layer of absurdity where it's like, why would the leaders of these countries care what happens all the way on the other side? And the answer, I don't know what the answer is, honestly, because that's something I've been scratching my head over for most of my life. Why do we care what happens in the Middle East? To the point where, I mean, obviously we care because they're human beings, but that's not what the world leaders are clearly caring about here.
Now, it could be argued that it's money, it's resources, it's control, it's power.
Yeah.
But those are all social constructs. Those are all things we need.
Yeah, and don't we have enough of that? Like,
that's the thing, though, is for some people there is no enough. There is no end, and that's the power of greed. As Americans, our country is really big on what we used to call exporting democracy, which basically means going around the world completely destabilizing your country until it becomes a dictatorship.
Yeah, I mean,
and then we kill the dictator, and
the whole cycle starts over.
And we inadvertently create terror cells that come and fly planes into buildings, and then we go back over there, and we never take any responsibility for our role in why this happened, and we just kind of stay in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and wherever the hell else we are these days that we shouldn't be there with.
Spend billions of dollars on that shit. Here's another thing that in terms of like the cultural context that this is in, that this reminded me of, and that is what I refer to as the golden age of Flash animation. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I remember it mid 2000s, pre YouTube.
Yeah, like my personal go-to website for that stuff was Albino Black Sheep. But I know there was also Newgrounds, where it was a program called Flash that you could use to make animation. And it was part of the democratization of animation. And there was an explosion of really creative animation there, and some of them dealt with some really interesting topics. The one that I keep remembering, possibly because of the similar title, was The End of the World. Have you seen that one?
I might have been a very long time ago. It sounds familiar.
So The End of the World was a comical exploration of or speculation, I guess, of how the world might end based on the political climate of the time. This was during the Bush administration. And it starts with like running through here's all the nations who currently have nukes, and then speculates on really hilariously on how all these countries might get into a conflict together and end up nuking one another, bringing about total nuclear annihilation. Fun. And it's getting worse and worse, though. And the way that these are similar in my mind is that, number one, they both deal with global issues. They're both funny, but the humor is not like the main thing there. But there's a lot of differences in that the end of the world was very dark, very pessimistic, and it also dealt with a lot more cultural stereotypes. It did like fake accents for the people from different cultures, and
this is the sort of stuff that would cause problems on today's YouTube.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I don't think it was necessarily like. Also, because it was only about the nations that have nuclear weapons, except I think Australia got a mention. It was mostly white people and Asians. There were no Africa.
Yeah.
There were no South America. It was a very white-centric thing. And I seem to remember it started with like China versus the U.S., whereas now it's Korea that is shaking its spears at us menacingly from the other side of the dang planet. So what I really feel is that this video really draws from and builds on a lot of those earlier Flash animation. Ultimately, like, it was a vast improvement, I think, in terms of style, in terms of substance. It took almost a year for him to make it, and it was a really it's long as animations go. The amount of detail, like if in each frame, in an interview, I think he said that he spent days trying to get a city plotted perfectly on a map and realized that no one's going to freeze that frame and check to see how accurate it was. And then he had to convince himself to move on. But he was just so obsessed with getting it, and I think that really pays off.
It definitely leads to a interesting end product. Interesting in a good way.
I have a couple of other bits that I pulled out as like things that I wanted to bring attention to. In the first was like what I called the creation myth. It's one of my favorite things about this video is the way that it explains the Big Bang and the beginning of the universe, because it's one of the longer sections.
Yeah.
But it's describing something that was a tiny fraction of a second.
Yeah, this not only got a couple sentences, this got a whole paragraph dedicated to it.
Yeah,
so
I think it was like almost a minute long. Section. And there's a big part that's just blank. And it's really an interesting answer to the question, how do you depict in an audiovisual medium the time before the universe began, when there's no time and no space?
There's nothing and everything. In fact, there is no thing, there is no time, there is no thing, there is no when. It's just every. That's how every it is.
Yeah, and it's like all you can really do is break grammar, I think, too, because the way that language works depends on there being time and space. Nothing was never anywhere. That's why it's been everywhere. It's been so everywhere you don't need a where. You don't even need a when. That's how every it gets.
And then it's just blank and silent and boring.
Yeah, someone commented on the YouTube video, every time I watch this, that silence gets longer. When I'm like just watching it like in the background, whenever that part like happens, I have to like look and be like, yep, there's the nothing and everything all at once, and then something happens, and it's really interesting because it's kind of in harmony with something that I thought when I was a teenager and I was trying to make sense of the Big Bang. Back then, I thought I was a philosopher, and maybe I was, but
we all. But I wasn't philosophers at some point.
Yeah, at least those of us who actually bother to think, and that's great. I think we need more people thinking. And I was trying to imagine, because I was like, also trying to figure out whether I believe in God. I was trying to, like, as people do sometimes when they're bored, I was trying to reconcile science with religion. And I was trying to imagine what might have led God to like trigger the Big Bang. And what I ended up thinking about in my mind was very similar to like the way this is. It was just like, and a lot of people I think have come up with the idea God created the world because he was bored. And that's kind of, it doesn't say that exactly here, but it says, forget this.
Yeah.
I want to be something, go somewhere, do something. I want things to change. And it's like, when nothing was never anywhere, nothing changed. It's like, it breaks your brain just thinking about it. And this is why I'm like, again, we're both poets. I think that this is poetry. Yeah. It's like the best kind of poetry. It's taking something that you can't put into words and putting it into words. And the other thing is, I know it's possible because everything is here and it probably already happened. Is like, I can't tell if that's Bill Wurtz imagining himself to be a creator god creating the universe, or if it's Bill Wurtz, like as a millennial in the United States, trying to make a video about the history of the universe, trying to figure out how it began. And maybe it's both. What if here's a question. Okay. What if we are all living in Bill Wurtz's video about the history of the world, and Bill Wurtz is God?
Well, it finally slowed down.
God damn, this is.
but I think that there is something to the sort of layered time theory where all of time is stacked on top of each other, and we all simultaneously exist with every other time that came before us and every other time that comes after us. It's time travel theory. I don't remember who came up with it or whatever else, but the idea is that time is not linear, it is a tower.
That's one way of looking at it. I think I came across that theory when I was younger, and I was like...
And then, yeah. And then, of course, I could be just babbling off some fictional version of something far more complicated.
I think that... I seem to remember it may have been Time Magazine or some other magazine that tries to explain things to everybody. I seem to remember reading an article. Some physicist has an idea that time is not linear, but like all moments exist simultaneously. And I remember reading it and thinking it was total bullshit, but it may have been just because it was written badly. Because it did that rhetorical technique where you try to like reconcile a really abstract theory with something very concrete. In that it started with, this physicist believes that time does not exist. And if you like visit him in his home, you might believe it because it looks like this town was taken straight out of medieval Europe or something like that. It's and nothing has changed in thousands of years here. And I'm like, God damn it, that's the metaphor you go with?
Yeah.
That's like, if this theory is true, it has absolutely nothing to do with some like European town that still looks like it's in the Middle Ages. It's and that just turned me off of it entirely. And that's like another thing that I really like about this explanation of like the Big Bang is that it's nothing in there is a metaphor. Like when the Big Bang is just, we're using like the metaphor of an explosion. It's not an explosion.
It's like, okay, gravity has crunched everything into this tiny speck, and it just crunched a little too hard one day, and it relaxed.
Well, yeah,
and then it's just been relaxing ever since.
But even that doesn't really get at the fact that time and space itself were equally compressed. It's not like we had a tiny speck floating in endless nothingness. There was no nothingness for it to float in.
Yeah.
Like he says, nothing was never anywhere. All of space is compressed. There is no space.
There's no space. There's no time.
It's just a point. It's not even a point on a field. It's just a point.
I think that this is not really backed up by a whole lot of science that I'm aware of. The heat death of the universe, which is billions and billions of years away, so please don't panic. The eventual heat death in the universe, that's when all the stars burn out and everything goes black and cold. Well, what happens after that? What happens when all the heat dies? Well, what becomes the dominant force? Gravity. So the universe, which has expanded and expanded and expanded for hundreds of trillions of years, once the heat death happens, what's left? Come right back into singularity and start the whole process over again. And that's so the idea that nothing was everywhere or nothing was ever anything, but then coming back around to was I want to invent time and space, and I know it's possible because everything is here and it probably already happened.
Yeah, which is like another thing. When time doesn't exist, there is no order to events. It probably already happened because time doesn't exist, and there is no distance between the past and the present and the future. It's all in one moment.
And it's like this cycle that's going to continue to repeat itself until, well, because there really isn't going to be.
There is no until, because it's all going to keep going.
It's just going to collapse, and there, it's like the time and space are going to be reinvented, and maybe it'll be better this time.
And that brings me to the theory of eternal recurrence, which was one of the first philosophers that I really got into as a teenager was Nietzsche. No surprise there. But he believed in the eternal recurrence, which is exactly what you explained. The universe will end and then re-begin. The way that he believed was that it would happen in the exact same way. Every individual person would be reborn in the exact form that they were. All events would happen in the exact same, and it would just loop Groundhog Day forever.
See, that I have a hard time believing.
Yeah, me too.
Because I am a multiverse believer, possibly more from the fictional aspects than the actual theory. But I believe that in a universe of infinite possibilities, every possibility is explored. Whether or not we're conscious to that plane of existence, because it's like you're playing a good role playing game, and your choices actually determine where your story goes. So it's like I have a hard time believing that on another go around that we would do the exact same things over again, even though we would still not have the knowledge of it. I just find it very, very unlikely that you would get the exact same results again.
Yeah, I mean, and then we have chaos theory, which we all know about because of Jurassic Park. But, but here's where I started to really make peace with that idea, and not necessarily believe it, but accept that it's not quite as absurd as I originally thought. And that is, when you're dealing with infinites, there really is the way that Nietzsche explained it, I think, was that matter and energy are finite, but time is infinite. So eventually, you would exhaust all the possibilities of ways to arrange all the matter and energy throughout time, and eventually you just have to start to repeat because all the possible variations would be exhausted. And at that point, I'm like, okay, if time really is infinite, matter and energy are really finite, then yeah, that would be true. We would eventually exhaust all those possibilities, and then we'd have to start all over. But I think that makes it a whole lot easier to digest in terms of human suffering, because part of the appeal of the idea that the universe will happen again is that we get a chance to do it better. And maybe there will be a version of the world where trans people aren't oppressed, or where slavery didn't happen, or where I'm not totally broke today. It's like there could be a version of the universe where I am not in the situation that I'm in. And if the reason that things happen exactly the same way again is because all the other possibilities also exist, then that makes it a whole lot easier to live with. And it, in turn, makes me feel a little bit better about the situation I'm living in. Because it's like, yeah, things are pretty hard right now, but it could be better and it could be worse. And according to this theory, that means it really is better. And there's also a universe where I am literally stomping on Donald Trump's face right now with my steel-toed boots, and I can hear his nose cracking, and it's beautiful. Oh no, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I'm not usually this. I'm not usually this violent. It just brings it out of me.
I am absolving you of whatever guilt you feel that you need to have, which is completely unnecessary.
Thank you. It means a lot. So, and then we have the creation of humanity, which is like a different kind of creation myth. There's a really interesting summary of like the evolution of all life on Earth, including the bit where the sun is a deadly laser. Not anymore, there's a blanket. But we can't move on to the land because there's no food there and because we can't walk. And then okay, there's plants on the land. You animals want to come on the land now, and it's like, okay, yeah, we'll go on land now that there's food there. And it kind of brings up the idea that like, yeah, life on this planet is in its original form aquatic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, human beings live on land, but like living on land is not like any more natural than living in the ocean. And in fact, it's a whole lot harder for a living being to live on land in the grand scheme of things. And it's only worth it if there's food up there.
Mm-hmm. And it took us a long time to get to people.
Yes, it does.
We're talking hundreds of billions of years.
Yeah, human beings. It's not like God created the heaven and the earth and then like 5 days later created a dude. It's more like lots and lots and lots of different animals evolved and became extinct, and more evolved and then became extinct, and more evolved and became extinct, and then finally we get something resembling a human. And it's mammal time. Here come the mammals. Look at those breasts. Because of course that's what makes them mammals.
Right.
And now they're going to dominate the world, and one of them just learned how to grab stuff and walk. No, like walk like that, as in
fully upright.
As in fully upright, and grab stuff at the same time. And bang rocks together and make pointed rocks, and set things on fire and make crazy sounds with their voice, which can mean different things. That's a human person. So how has he defined humanity? It's grabbing stuff, so opposable thumbs. It's walking upright and grabbing stuff at the same time, which is multitasking. Mm-hmm. Yay! And setting things on fire. And so it's like fire, tools, bang rocks together to make pointed rocks. So you're making tools, you're making fire, and you're making vocal sounds, which mean things. Mm-hmm. So he's boiled humanity down to language, fire and tools, walking upright, opposable thumbs.
I would say the mentioning of fire would be our ability to harness nature to our own means.
Yeah, and
that comes up later when they start talking about farming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an ongoing debate in evolutionary science and also philosophy as like what makes humans human. Mm-hmm. Theologians have this crazy idea that God told Adam that he has domination over life on Earth. And some people have this theory that what makes humans different from animals is we're intelligent. They're not, which is bullshit because pigs and dolphins and whales and elephants, they are all very intelligent.
The intelligence is relative too.
Yeah, it is.
You know, what we consider intelligent life as far as a human being concerned is, you know, probably a dumbass compared to like dolphins.
Well, yeah, and not only that, but there are humans who aren't intelligent. Mm-hmm. Like we have severe mental disabilities, some of us. There's definitely a lot of social stigma attached to that. But there's very, very few people who would argue that someone with severe mental disabilities is not human.
Well, not in those exact terms. They'll euphemize it.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah. But they know enough not to come right out and say it, even if they believe it. And that's like, so you would have to be a monster, honestly, to believe that intelligence is the only thing that makes humans human. And interestingly enough, intelligence isn't mentioned in this like list of things that makes humans human, according to this video.
Nothing really metaphysical either. It's, you know,
It's what we do. Not only that, it's not one single thing. It's several things. Which there are animals that have hands. There are animals that have language. Dolphins have language. That's something that's
and there are animals that use tools.
Yes.
And some of them even make those tools. Obviously, they're more rudimentary and presumably primitive. But using a stick to scratch your back, which is something that some gorillas do.
Yeah.
That's a tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I also like how he says it's a human person rather than it's a human or it's a person. Because when we're talking about humanity, one thing that I've been saying lately is that animals are people too. So it's not just that it's a person, it's that it's a human person. And we can make an argument about whether a specific animal is or isn't a person. That's a philosophical debate we have to the end of time. But I think in the same way that hypothetically, if aliens came down to Earth, we could say that they are people. I don't think that we should rule out that animals on Earth already.
I think it's also important to note that there were people before humans.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you're a human person as compared to a Cro-Magnon person.
Yeah, I think we're technically Cro-Magnons, but like Neanderthals.
Yeah, Neanderthal.
But you mentioned earlier the agriculture, and this is something I really find cool. People on the planet chasing their food, and one of them says, "Fuck it, time to plant some grass," meaning wheat, corn crops. Right. Look at this, I control the food now. Now everyone will want to be my friend and live near me. Let's all build houses, except mine is bigger because I own the food. And it's not in the narration, but the word that flashes on the screen is social hierarchy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't say patriarchy. It doesn't say capitalism.
Those come later.
It doesn't say tyranny. It doesn't say monarchy. It doesn't say feudalism. It says social hierarchy, which is such a broad term. And it's putting the basis of social hierarchy is property and possession and control. Because it's like we have one person has control over the food or the land or the building materials, the means of production, if you will. And other people need it, so they have to in some way be subordinate to the person who has control over it. Otherwise, it's something that you can hold over other people. And I think the way that it puts that in really neutral terms, it allows us to get a grasp of, okay, this is what power is. This is what hierarchy is. And then we can go from there and figure out, okay, how do we feel about that? Is that good or bad? Is it just? Is it natural? Can it change?
Should it change?
Should it change? And that can be an opening to all kinds of political, economic, and like philosophical discussion. Okay, so here's another bit that I really as much as I really like the opening, I really also really like the way the video ends.
Yeah.
Like I said, it ends with a summary of modern life. And it says some people have no friends, some people have no food. And that's interesting because both of those problems are equally weighted, I think, in the narration. We think of like first world problems, like how dare you be upset that your phone doesn't work when there are children starving in Africa. But the thing is, your phone not working can be a huge problem if you are desperately lonely and you need to talk to someone, or if you don't have anyone to talk to anyway.
Isolation is very understated as a devastating thing. People think it's as easy as, well, just get out of the house more or whatever else. And it's like, well, there's factors to this. There's depression, there's social anxiety, there's
the fact that there are no places you can go to be sociable without spending money.
Or drinking alcohol.
Or being religious.
Yeah. There are very few social spaces that are considered social just, because that is why they are there. A library isn't even that, because you're not supposed to be talking in the library, or certainly not very loudly.
And the other thing that it goes on to mention, the globe is warming and the ocean is full of plastic. Oh, wow. And that is a very, very brief way of putting these really amazing, well, terrifying, like end of the world stuff. It doesn't even mention the threat of nuclear annihilation because that's not what most people are afraid of right now. Right now, the main thing is global warming and how do we stop it? Can we stop it? And if we can't stop it, how can we survive it? There's this line that I really love. Let's save the planet, said everybody, not knowing how. It's true that not everyone agrees that we should save the planet. Some people are like gunning for apocalypse because of weird religious reasons. But yeah, everybody agrees that saving the world is a good thing. What we can't agree on is how. Huge problem that is so simply and beautifully stated here. And it just makes me so depressed.
And it's like, and then we have a thing inventor that invents a thing that invents another thing. Like,
technology is out of control.
Technology is out of control. That's like the suggested fix for the world being on fire. Okay, so we have a thing inventor that invents a thing. Well, we don't know what those things are.
Yeah. But it gets more, what do we get from there? More inventions. Great. Inventions. Just what got us into this mess in the first place.
Yeah. We're in a weird place.
Yeah.
And like there's been very few points in history where total mutual assured annihilation was this apparent. You know, we had the Cold War, and especially was ramping up in the late 70s and early 80s when there was a lot of people who really were just like any day now. Somebody's going to press a button and all the bombs are going to go. And, you know, we come to the mid to late 2010s. And even though we had been told about global warming for like 30 years,
yep,
at least, it's like now it's like, oh shit, we got to do something about
this. And there's
still
people denying it.
That's the thing is we've lived through some of the consequences already. Extreme weather patterns, you know, 100 and some odd degree days in places that never got over 70 usually. When we were growing up, what was the average summer temperature? 80 was a hot day. Nowadays it's 90, 100 on the worst. And of course you can't go outside because the sun will just beat you to death.
Sun is a deadly laser.
And that blanket's getting broken.
It's gone. It's you 80s kids and your aerosol hairspray, you killed us. It's all your fault. No, it's not that. It's the goddamn capitalists.
Yes, there's a lot of contributing factors. The hairspray didn't help, but then again, yes, it is major multinational corporations and pollution and our leaders not taking this seriously. Yeah. Even though, you know, every scientist and everybody who's like entire purpose in life is to study this stuff is saying like, okay, no, we're going to die. This is going to happen in the next 20 years. We have maybe 10 years to stop this. We need to do something now. Actually, we needed to do something 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But, well, you know, that's the fun part of being a millennial. We're all going to die. Yeah. And there's no money.
Well, there's money.
Just not for us.
There's money. And it's all in the hands of the people who don't want to do anything with it except use it to make more. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's so... I think we've talked about this enough. On that amazingly lighthearted note,
we're all gonna die.
Oh wow, yeah. So, how did you feel about this discussion?
I think
the discussion in like a literal sense. Well, we were not at war.
I don't know. Maybe we are.
Are we?
I don't know. I might have been spying on you during this whole conversation.
No. I don't have any nukes, by the way.
Darn.
You'll have to find someone with nukes if you want to have a Cold War.
I don't want to have a Cold War. Jeez. I want to get this over with. I mean, if I'm gonna die in a cataclysmic, boiling earth on fire way, I'm just like, let me just get it over with.
This is the origin story of Daria Quinn, supervillain.
We already knew that.
All right, let's get this over with. I'm Cy Castells.
I'm Daria Quinn.
This has been False Dichotomies.
Thanks for spending your time with us.
My brain.
That happens.